Hello and welcome to this new crafty video. So here's a couple of materials you'll need. I saved up some of these old coffee bags from Starbucks that had some pretty neat colors that I really liked. And I have a glass frame here that will hold about 6 of these little bags cut down. So when I used to work at Starbucks, I loved seeing all the different designs for some of the bags, and the colors just were really unique. So I didn't really want to toss them out, and I thought, you know what, they would make some really nice wall art one day whenever I got a house. So the first thing I did after I had washed all the bags is I opened them up flat and I cut them to a smaller size, taking off most of the sides. I knew that they were going to be with the main logo and where they were from down at the bottom. So with my utility knife, and then later on I used my metal ruler, I just cut them down to the size I'd like. But first I just wanted to trim them down just so there isn't so much kind of hanging off it. So I started with one and I fiddled with it for a while to get the exact layout that I liked, which was the yellow one on the left. So once I found the size that I liked that would fit into my frame, I cut that and I had that as a template. What I did with all the rest of them was I started off by just cutting below the text of where it was from. So that way it would be pretty uniform throughout all of them. I then tried to line them up because I knew all the designs were a little bit different in size. So the air sealed little hole there in the middle, I started by kind of lining them up. Some of them don't match, but they usually kind of get the center about the same. So I'd line them up and then have the colored bar that goes horizontally below it that either says if it's a light, medium, or dark roast. I would line those up, and then painstakingly I would keep flipping it over and just seeing where the rectangle would line up on the little sketch that was at the top. And once I got it the way I wanted it, I made sure that I held my ruler very firmly because I didn't want anything kind of missing. Because when you try and trim these down in very small or fine sections, they tend to just kind of bend and fold as opposed to cut no matter how sharp it is. So I made sure to hold everything strongly in place. So after I cut the bottom part, then I went to the top. And again, before I cut the sides now, I made sure that it lined up exactly the way I wanted it. And once I had it, I would do the left and the right side. So that was the first bag done, and now I had 2 identical sizes, and you can kind of get the idea of those sketches, see how there's a little bit more room at the top of the coral one as opposed to the yellow, which is okay with me. So then I kind of sped this up a little bit, but I continue on and do the same with the other 4 bags. got them all trimmed down to size, I then discarded the scraps and cleaned up my area. Then I went and laid out all 6 of them, and I kind of shifted them around. So before taping them together, I wanted to make sure I liked the look of it. So I tried to alternate the warm colors and the cool colors. And then I tried not to have 2 darks together or 2 pastel colors together. So I kind of kept shifting them around and until I got a layout that I liked. After that, I went in one by one, and with some rubbing alcohol in my spray bottle, I went ahead and just cleaned the entire front and back part of it. The clear sticker that holds the bag sealed together before you can wind it down leaves a bit of a sticky residue, but it came off quite easily with some rubbing alcohol. So I just went through, made sure to clean it all. Even though they were cleaned with soap and water, a lot of that stickiness didn't want to come off with that. Now, I did try with a piece of the scrap parts that I cut off. I tried to iron them to see if I could flatten them out and get them looking a little bit nicer, so I didn't have those crinkles, but that really didn't work out. It just kind of warped the plasticky metal material a bit, so I decided to forego that, and they had been kind of left flat for a while as I kind of been collecting them. So they did get pretty flat, and then once you squish them behind the glass frame, you don't really notice the wrinkles too much. So I left them as is, cleaned them all up. So you can see just here, I sped this part up as well, so you can just kind of have a watch while I clean them all Now that they're all clean, I made sure to line them all up again the same way I had them before. And I just started with one row to tape them together, so that way none of them kind of get bent out of shape, like skewed or anything like that. So I would just take just a regular piece of matte tape, get a piece, line them up, mainly making sure that the bottom edge lines up of the row on top, because I can trim the outer edges, but once they don't line up at the center line, that's where a problem becomes. So I took my time and really made sure that, I could retape them, but I wanted to make sure I got it the first go. So I'd line up the bottom and tape up all the seams. I just went with one piece of tape to hold them in place. And then once I got all 3 together, or actually when I got all 6 together, that's when I had gone in and taped them right to the very edges, and then just so none of them would kind of lift out of place. Like you can see one of the corners kind of curling. So later on, once I got all 6 together, I just went through and taped them all together. So when I worked on this bottom row, putting the 3 side by side, this is the row that I made sure that all the top parts lined up together. So essentially that middle horizontal seam, I wanted it to be very well lined up, so I didn't have to trim that. The outer edges, I believe I only trimmed a couple of little pieces to the left and right that didn't line up, but the rest lined up seamlessly. Once all the seams were taped, I went ahead and put a small piece of tape on those circle, like those air sealed vents. I put a piece of tape over it and then I burnished it with the sheath of my scissors, and that really helped make it all stick together, look almost flat on the front where you couldn't necessarily notice it as much. So I went ahead and did that with the rest of it, and then I went and burnished all those seams where I put tape. So I wanted to make sure there weren't really many air bubbles and that everything was holding really well. And there's the whole assembled piece. So now I can get my frame out, and I made sure to wipe down the inside with that same rubbing alcohol just to make sure there were no fingerprints or marks and dusts on the inside of the glass that would be seen whenever I hung it up. Now when I flipped it over, this is where I realized that you could see a couple of the brown edges of this MDF kind of peeking through where it didn't go completely to the edge. So instead of having to get a whole big piece of black paper, I just cheated it and I took a Sharpie and just colored in the entire border. You can easily choose some black paint if you wanted it to be very dark, but I was okay with just some Sharpie because the seam was so minimal and not in every spot that the Sharpie did the job perfectly. Now to secure it to the piece of MDF, I did use one of these little double-sided tape, almost like those whiteout dispensers. But unfortunately, the winding reel for it to wind it back into the little thingy, it wasn't winding, so I was still able to use it because I didn't want to throw it out. It was essentially still full. I just kind of had to trim off the little plastic and kind of peel it upwards afterwards. But I did get enough on the back of it. I just kind of taped it down into place so it didn't keep sliding away from me. And it worked perfectly. So this double-sided tape was perfect. I just made multiple rows of it. It didn't have to be perfect. If you really wanted this to be a permanent thing, then you could use a spray adhesive that you could easily get a whole coat of it, and then you can use either a burnisher or a brayer roller to brayer it down onto it and really have no air bubbles and everything is flat. But I just wanted it to be, affixed to it, and then the glass would just hold it in place. And I made sure to put some of that double-sided tape on both the coffee bags itself and on the MDF frame. And here specifically, you can see where that black Sharpie really came into play, uh, because there were the edges that came through, mainly on the top and bottom, not so much the left and right. The black frame did cover it, but the top and bottom, it didn't cover it completely. So once I got everything pushed down nice and flat, make sure it's all adhered, I went in and I put my glass frame on top and secured it all together. All right, and now that's the final result. And so we have it hung in our kitchen right now. Eventually it will be moved to the coffee bar area, but I have another printed off sign on the other side that says more espresso, less depresso. So this just goes on the other side, and I think it's a really good way to recycle any of your favorite coffee bags that you don't really want to toss the artwork out. Thanks guys for watching. I really appreciate it.